Hello, I'm Jeff Scheidock, Dean of Students at Calvin Theological Seminary, and recently I was honored to host a conversation between Mark Braverman and Gary Burge about Israel and Palestine and about the ongoing violence in Gaza. Mark Braverman is a Jewish American with family roots in Israel. He's a retired clinical psychologist. He serves as the executive director of Kairos USA, a movement to unify and mobilize American Christians to work for a just peace in Israel and Palestine. Gary Burge is an adjunct professor of New Testament here at Calvin Theological Seminary, and he's an expert on the integration of theology and politics in the Middle East. In this part of their conversation, Mark and Gary help us to understand the history and causes of the current conflict in Gaza and Israel.
Okay, so now let's bring this back to the present day now, where it applies directly, and talk about why I, as a Jew, am horrified and heartbroken at what has become of this latest restoration and expression of that Jewish yearning and that Jewish identification with place and nationhood and boundaries. Because if you want to understand the context of what has happened, what happened on October 7th, and the horror that was visited upon the Jewish citizens of Israel, you need to understand that that stems directly from the Zionist project, which I understand was a liberation project because things were not working out very well for the Jews in Europe at the end of the 19th century, and how it has been brought to this, because that horrible violence, the root cause of it was the 75-year plus project of ethnic cleansing, and now it's being called by its name genocide, visited upon the indigenous Palestinians by the state of Israel. Ilan Pappé, a Jewish Israeli historian, recently said in a lecture at UC Berkeley, he said, we can't understand. People say, why? Why is this happening? What's Hamas after? He says, you have to understand that in historical context. And here's what he said, which I think says it all. He said, the Palestinians, the Gazans, who broke through that fence and visited that horrible violence on 3 kibbutzim that were along the Gaza border on the Israeli side, were the third generation descendants of Palestinians who had been driven out, evicted from their villages along there, which are now occupied by those very same kibbutzim that they came back to. Think about that. That's the root cause of that violence.
It's an amazing story.
These kids grew up in Gaza, which has been described as an open-air prison, which is basically a concentration camp for Palestinian refugees driven out of their homes to make way for the state of Israel. That's the story that has to be told here. That's the story that Israelis are not being told. They are being told as Jews, and I grew up with this as well, that those people out there, whether they're Germans or Arabs or any kind of nations, the Goyim, hate us, which is why we need Israel, which is why we need this kingdom, this temple, this army. And so we will protect you. That doesn't work. You are going to get popular resistance, and sometimes in horrible forms, for a people that has been dispossessed and being subjected to slow-moving genocide.
So, Mark, this is the question I have for you, and I wonder, as a Jew, and I know you've given this a lot of thought. When I'm talking to evangelicals, and that's a large part of my own theological background, but I hear Jews actually talking about this now as well. What we see going on right now in Gaza really is an extension or a fulfillment or a realization of what Joshua did in the Holy Land. When Israel exiled, they say, 700,000 Palestinians from 1948 to say 1955, pushed them out of their homes. When Israel conquers Gaza, or is trying to right now, this is Joshua and the Canaanites revisited. In other words, God endorsed Joshua's violent cleansing of the Holy Land from Canaanites. So isn't Israel doing the very same thing? Ergo, God is on Israel's side. I hear that more than you'd ever like to imagine.
I'm sure.
It's pretty common. So how does that rest with you as a Jew, and your community is using that story? It's tough for me as a Christian when I hear it.
Look, it's tough for me as an American when I hear it.
Yeah.
It's tough for me as a human being when I hear it, whether it's happening to the Palestinians or it's happening to the people of Kosovo, or whether it's happening to the Uyghurs in China, whether it's happening to the Ukrainians on the Russian border, whether it's happening to the Comanches and the Dakota Sioux here in our own history, or to the indigenous people of Australia. I mean, this is an old human story, which, by the way, the church from its early days, from the doctrine of discovery, has been complicit in and endorsed. It's just human nature. So the church is the human nature. Jews are now guilty of it now that we've become empowered. We do the same thing to them that they did to us.
And in all of these sort of gestures of conquest, is it to conquer and to take as sort of a national initiative, but also it seems what comes with it is a divine endorsement. So I want to conquer and take, but by the way, God is on my side.
Yeah, well, okay, so a couple of things with that. First of all, Ben-Gurion, the father of modern Zionism, and the one who turned a liberation movement into a settler colonial project brilliantly, who was he was a Russian socialist. He was an atheist. And he has said, well, I don't believe in God, but he promised us the land. So the movement has been using the Bible, and Ben-Gurion believes that the religious factions would wither away and Judaism as a religion would be replaced by Zionism as a secular ideology. The opposite has happened, which is not surprising.
Yeah.
But I, as a Jew who was raised on Zionism, which I was born in 1948, my Judaism was a combination of rabbinic Judaism and ethnic Zionism. Judaism and Zionism were the same. The Jewish people and the state of Israel was the same. This was not true throughout Jewish history. We had a yearning for Zion, but it was kind of a spiritual thing.
So you were born in the late 1940s. So I'm just trying to go back. Would your parents have had the same socializing? Judaism and Zionism are synonymous?
No, because Zionism, when my parents grew up, was not a thing. I mean, it was a thing, but Israel had not yet been established. So it was not as strong. In 1948, and in fact, Jewish denominations, especially the Reform, who wanted to be as much like Protestants as they could be, had a platform in the early 19th century that officially disavowed Zionism as an ethnic nationalist ideology, saying we do not want to be associated with nationalism. We are citizens of the world. We are citizens of our own country. Reform Judaism was born in Germany. We are good Germans. We do not want to be associated with this project and with this program. 1948 came 3 years after the ovens of Auschwitz were still smoldering. It was a new thing. There was a Zionist train. We need Israel to be safe. And if you were not on it, you were basically exiled to the periphery. There are Jews, most Jews today, most Jewish leaders today, look at me and what I say as, I will say it frankly, an anti-Zionist.
Yeah, right.
And say, you are no longer a Jew.
Yeah.
You are a danger to your people.
Or
you're
a self-hating Jew.
Or you're a self-hating Jew, there's that. So all kinds of names are thrown at you. Mm-hmm. And that to me is a tragedy for our faith and our community.
This was one part of the conversation between Mark and Gary. If you'd like to hear more, you can click on the next part of the conversation, or you can click on the full conversation.